The words came out of her mouth like honey over broken glass. Sweet on the surface, sharp underneath where it mattered. He means nothing to me anymore, Nick. I promise you that. Elise stood in our kitchen, her manicured fingers wrapped around a coffee mug that cost more than most people spend on groceries in a week. The morning light streaming through our Baltimore row house windows caught the highlights in her blonde hair, the expensive kind of blonde that required monthly appointments and serious money. She looked perfect, as always. That should have been my first warning. I'm Nick Harper, 39 years old, marine engineer by trade, skeptic by nature. 20 years in this business teaches you to look for stress fractures before they become catastrophic failures. Same principle applies to marriages, turns out. Brett Paxton means nothing, she repeated, setting down the mug with the kind of deliberate care that screamed rehearsed. The whole thing was a mistake. Ancient history. Brett Paxton. Even his name sounded like something you'd scrape off your shoe. Her boss at the litigation firm where she worked as a paralegal. Recently divorced, drove a BMW M5, wore suits that cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. The kind of guy who probably practiced his handshake in the mirror. Ancient history, I repeated, stirring sugar into my own coffee. Like last week, ancient? Or actually ancient? She laughed, but it came out forced. You're being paranoid, Nick. I told you, nothing happened. We had coffee a few times when he was going through his divorce. He needed someone to talk to, that's all. I nodded, keeping my expression neutral. 20 years of marriage teaches you when your wife is lying, just like 20 years of engineering teaches you when a structure is about to collapse. The signs are always there if you know how to look. Okay, I said. I believe you. That was lie number 1. Mine, not hers. Hers were already in double digits. The truth was, I'd been watching the cracks form for months. Late nights at the office that stretched later and later. New clothes that appeared in her closet without explanation. A suddenly renewed interest in her appearance that coincided perfectly with Brett Paxton's arrival at her firm 6 months ago. But the real tell was her phone. Elise had always been casual about it, leaving it on counters, asking me to check messages while she was driving. Suddenly it was glued to her hand, face down on every surface, password protected for the first time in our entire marriage. I'm glad we talked about this, she said, moving closer to kiss my cheek. Her perfume was different too, something expensive and subtle that definitely wasn't the department store stuff she'd worn for years. Me too, I said, and meant it. Not because I believed her, but because now I knew exactly where I stood. She left for work 20 minutes later, her heels clicking across our hardwood floors with the kind of confidence that comes from thinking you've successfully managed a difficult conversation. I watched from the window as she climbed into her Honda Civic, practical, reliable, nothing like the BMW M5 that had been parked 3 blocks away when I'd walked the dog that morning. My phone buzzed. Text from Bob Kowalski, my business partner, and the closest thing I had to a best friend. Coffee? You sound like you need it. Bob had the kind of intuition that made him good at his job. We ran a small marine engineering firm together, mostly contract work for the Port of Baltimore and some private yacht repairs. Nothing glamorous, but it paid the bills and kept us busy. I texted back, Harbor Diner, 20 minutes. The Harbor Diner sat wedged between a ship repair facility and a parking lot that had seen better decades. The coffee was strong, the food was honest, and the clientele consisted mainly of dock workers and engineers who appreciated both qualities. Bob was already in our usual booth when I arrived, his weathered face creased with concern. You look terrible, he said by way of greeting. Good morning to you too? Bob had been married to the same woman for 32 years. They still held hands at company picnics. His advice on relationships generally boiled down to, talk to each other and don't be an idiot, which worked great if both parties were operating in good faith. Elise? He asked. I nodded, sliding into the booth across from him. The vinyl was cracked and repaired with duct tape, but it was honest about what it was, unlike some people. She's having an affair, I said. No point in dancing around it. Bob's coffee cup stopped halfway to his mouth. You sure? Sure enough. Evidence? The usual. New clothes, new perfume, phone attached to her hand like a medical device. Plus, she just gave me the "he means nothing to me anymore" speech, which is basically a confession wrapped in a denial. Could be innocent. Could be. But it's not. Bob set down his coffee and leaned back. So, what are you going to do? That was the question, wasn't it? The conventional wisdom said confront her, demand the truth, fight for the marriage, couples therapy, tearful confessions, promises to do better, the whole messy public spectacle of a marriage falling apart, and maybe, if you were lucky, getting put back together with duct tape and hope. But I'm an engineer. When a structure fails, you don't just patch the cracks and hope for the best. You analyze the failure, understand what went wrong, and build something better. Sometimes that means starting over completely. Nothing, I said. Yet. Nick, I'm not going to confront her. I'm not going to hire a private investigator. I'm not going to make a scene. Then what? I stirred my coffee, watching the cream swirl into patterns that reminded me of stress analysis charts. I'm going to wait and watch. And when I'm ready, I'm going to disappear. Bob's eyebrows climbed toward his hairline. Disappear? Not literally. Legally. Financially. Emotionally. I'm going to extract myself from this marriage so cleanly and completely that she won't know what happened until it's over. That sounds cold? I was going to say smart, but cold works too. The waitress refilled our coffee cups. She was probably 60, with the kind of no-nonsense efficiency that comes from decades of dealing with dock workers and their problems. She didn't ask if we wanted anything else, just left the check and moved on to the next table. You'll need a lawyer, Bob said. Already have one in mind. Tim Morrison, remember him from college? He specializes in asset protection now. Asset protection? Making sure people keep what's theirs when other people try to take it. Bob was quiet for a long moment, processing. How long have you been planning this? I haven't been planning anything, but I've been thinking about what I'd do if the marriage ever went sideways. Call it professional paranoia. Or good engineering. Same thing. We finished our coffee in comfortable silence. Outside, the morning shift was changing at the port, trucks and workers moving with the kind of choreographed efficiency that comes from years of practice. Everything had its place, its purpose, its proper function. When something didn't fit, you removed it. One question, Bob said as we stood to leave. What if you're wrong? What if she's telling the truth? I considered that. It was possible, however unlikely. Maybe Brett Paxton really did mean nothing to her. Maybe the new clothes and perfume were innocent. Maybe the phone secrecy was about something else entirely. Then I'll have wasted some time and energy being suspicious of my wife. But I'll still be married to someone who's capable of making me feel this way. Either way, something's broken that can't be fixed with good intentions and couples therapy. Bob nodded slowly. Fair enough. You need anything, you know where to find me. I drove home through the familiar streets of our neighborhood, past the mix of renovated row houses and corner stores that gave this part of Baltimore its character. Elise and I had bought our place 8 years ago, when her paralegal salary and my engineering income combined to make us solidly middle class. We talked about kids, maybe a bigger house in the suburbs eventually, normal married couple dreams. The house felt different when I walked back inside. Not empty, exactly, but hollow. Like the difference between a building that's structurally sound and one that's just waiting for the right stress to bring it down. I went to my home office, a converted bedroom on the second floor where I kept my computer and the paperwork for the business. Everything was organized, filed, accessible. I'd always been methodical about record keeping, another engineering habit that was about to become very useful. First step, finances. I logged into our online banking and started making notes. Joint checking account, joint savings, her individual checking account that I wasn't supposed to know about but had discovered years ago when she'd asked me to help with tax preparation. My business accounts, which were separate. The mortgage, car payments, credit cards, utilities. It was all there in black and white. 20 years of shared financial life, intertwined in ways that would take careful planning to separate, but not impossible. Nothing was impossible if you approached it systematically. Next, assets. The house, both cars, furniture, electronics, jewelry. Her engagement ring alone was worth more than most people's cars, though I suspected she'd fight harder for the coffee maker. People were funny about the things they considered essential. Finally, the business. That was the complicated part. Bob and I were 50-50 partners, but the company was my baby. I'd started it with my Navy severance pay and built it from nothing. Elise had no claim on it legally, but divorce courts could be creative about asset division. I spent 2 hours making lists, taking notes, creating what amounted to a financial inventory of our marriage. It was depressing how easily 20 years could be reduced to spreadsheets and account numbers. My phone buzzed. Text from Elise. Working late tonight? Don't wait up. I stared at the message for a long moment, then typed back, Okay, love you. Another lie, but a useful one. At 11:30 that night, I was reading in bed when I heard her car in the driveway. She came upstairs quietly, probably thinking I was asleep. I listened to her move around the bathroom, brushing her teeth, going through her nighttime routine. All normal, all familiar. She slipped into bed beside me, careful not to disturb the mattress too much. I kept my breathing steady, eyes closed, playing the part of the sleeping husband. Her phone was on the nightstand, charging, the same phone that had become so precious to her lately. I waited until her breathing deepened, until I was sure she was asleep. Then I waited another hour. At 2 a.m, her phone lit up. A text message, the screen glowing in the darkness of our bedroom. I couldn't see the content from my position, but I could see the name on the lock screen. Brett Paxton. At 2 a.m, Brett Paxton was texting my wife, the same Brett Paxton who meant nothing to her anymore. Ancient history Brett. Coffee and sympathy Brett. I lay there in the dark, listening to her breathe, and felt something fundamental shift inside me. Not anger, exactly. More like the moment when an engineer realizes that a structure can't be saved, when repair becomes impossible and demolition becomes the only option. She'd lied to me that morning, looked me in the eye, kissed my cheek, and lied, with the kind of practiced ease that suggested this wasn't her first time. I didn't move, didn't reach for the phone, didn't wake her up to demand explanations. Instead, I started planning. Methodically, carefully, the way I approached every complex engineering problem. Step 1, gather information. Step 2, secure assets. Step 3, prepare the exit strategy. Step 4, execute. Elise stirred beside me, probably dreaming about whatever Brett Paxton had texted her at 2 a.m. She looked peaceful, innocent even. But then, structures always looked solid, right up until the moment they collapsed. I closed my eyes and started making mental lists. There was work to do. The next morning played out like a perfectly choreographed lie. Elise woke up refreshed, chatty, full of stories about her late night at the office. She'd been reviewing depositions, she said. Very boring stuff, but important for a case they were working on. Brett's really pushing everyone hard on this one, she said, buttering her toast with casual precision. He wants everything perfect before we file. Brett again. For someone who meant nothing to her anymore, he certainly came up in conversation a lot. Sounds stressful, I said, not looking up from my newspaper. It is, but it's good experience. Brett says I have real potential in litigation support. Brett says, Brett thinks, Brett wants. Every sentence was a small betrayal wrapped in professional language. That's great, honey. I'm proud of you. She beamed at me, and for a moment I almost felt guilty about what I was planning. Almost. Then I remembered the phone lighting up at 2 a.m, and the feeling passed. After she left for work, I called Tim Morrison. Tim and I had been roommates junior year at University of Maryland, back when he was planning to save the world through environmental law, and I was convinced I was going to design the next generation of nuclear submarines. Life had taken us in different directions. Him to a lucrative practice in asset protection and business law, me to marine engineering and a small company that specialized in keeping other people's boats floating. Nick Harper, he said when his secretary put me through. This is either a social call, which would be a first, or you need a lawyer. Please tell me it's social. I need a lawyer. Divorce? Tim had always been quick. How do you know? 20 years of marriage, first time you've called me, and you sound like someone who's been chewing glass. Either divorce or you've committed a felony. Since you're not the felony type, that leaves divorce. She's having an affair. Evidence? Circumstantial but solid. Changed behavior, new clothes, phone secrecy, late nights at work. Plus she volunteered a denial yesterday about her boss, which basically confirms it. The denial confirms it? When someone tells you unprompted that another person means nothing to them, that person means something. Tim was quiet for a moment. You want to fight it or end it? End it, cleanly, completely. I want to disappear from her life so thoroughly that she won't know what happened until it's over. That's unusual. Most people want to fight. I'm not most people. Can you do it? Probably. Depends on your situation. Assets, debts, kids. No kids. House, cars, normal stuff. I own half of a business. She makes decent money as a paralegal, but nothing spectacular. Any chance of reconciliation? I thought about that. About 20 years of marriage, good times and bad. Shared dreams and private jokes. About the woman I'd fallen in love with and the stranger she'd become. No. Okay. I can see you this afternoon. Bring everything. Bank statements, tax returns, property deeds, business documents, everything. Tim, I want this to be surgical. No mess, no drama, no public scenes. Just gone. I understand. Nick, you sure about this? I'm sure. I spent the morning gathering documents. 20 years of paperwork, all of it meticulously organized because that's how engineers think. Tax returns going back 7 years, bank statements, the mortgage documents, car titles, insurance policies, business and corporation papers, and partnership agreements. It was like performing an autopsy on my own life. At noon, I drove to Tim's office in downtown Baltimore. He'd done well for himself. Corner office in a glass tower with a view of the inner harbor. The kind of place where hourly rates started at numbers that would make most people wince. Tim looked exactly like what he was, a successful lawyer in his early 40s. Expensive suit, confident handshake, the kind of smile that probably cost extra. But his eyes were sharp and sympathetic, and I remembered why I'd liked him in college. "You look terrible," he said, gesturing to a chair across from his desk. "So I've been told." He spent an hour going through my documents, making notes, asking questions. Professional, thorough, occasionally wincing at some detail or number. "Okay," he said finally. "Good news and bad news. Good news is, you're in better shape than most people who walk through that door. No kids means no custody issues. You kept your business separate, so that's protected. You've got decent assets and manageable debt. Bad news. Maryland is an equitable distribution state, which means the court tries to be fair rather than just splitting everything 50-50. But fair is subjective, and judges sometimes have interesting ideas about what's equitable. Meaning? Meaning she could potentially claim part of your business if she can argue she contributed to its success. Emotional support, maintaining the home, that sort of thing. It's a stretch, but I've seen it happen." I felt something cold settle in my stomach. How do we prevent that? Carefully, and by making sure she doesn't want to fight. Tim leaned back in his chair, studying me with the kind of attention that probably made opposing counsel nervous. "Tell me about this disappearing act you want to pull." I explained my thinking. The gradual extraction, the asset protection, the complete withdrawal from her life. Tim listened without interrupting, occasionally making notes. "It's doable," he said when I finished. "Legally, anyway. Ethically might be a different question, but you're not asking me to do anything illegal or even particularly unusual. Just thorough." "What's the timeline?" "For the preparation, 2 weeks, maybe 3. I'll need to set up some accounts, file some paperwork, prepare the divorce documents. The actual disappearing part is up to you." "And then?" "Then we wait. She'll try to contact you, obviously. When that fails, she'll hire her own lawyer. We'll negotiate through counsel, everything clean and professional. With luck, she'll want it over quickly and won't fight too hard on the details." "What if she does fight?" Tim's smile was sharp enough to cut glass. "Then she'll discover that fighting a battle against someone who's prepared for war while she's still figuring out what happened is a losing proposition." I left Tim's office feeling something I hadn't experienced in months. Hope. Not for reconciliation. That ship had sailed the moment I saw Brett Paxton's name on her phone. But hope that I could end this marriage on my terms, with my dignity intact and my assets protected. The next 2 weeks passed in a strange kind of suspended animation. Elise continued her performance as the loving wife, complete with late nights at the office and increasingly creative explanations for her schedule. I played my part too, the trusting husband, supportive and understanding, asking just enough questions to seem interested but not enough to seem suspicious. But underneath the surface, I was systematically dismantling our shared life. It started with the joint accounts. Nothing dramatic, just gradual transfers that looked like normal bill paying and expense management. A few hundred here, 1,000 there, moved to a new account that Tim had helped me establish. All legal, all documented, all perfectly within my rights as a joint account holder. Next came the business. Bob and I had a long conversation about asset protection and worst-case scenarios. He was sympathetic but practical. If my divorce got messy, it could affect the company. We restructured a few things, moved some assets around, made sure that my personal problems couldn't become business problems. "You're being very methodical about this," Bob observed as we reviewed the paperwork. "It's the only way I know how to be. Most people would be screaming, throwing things, hiring private investigators. Most people aren't engineers. The hardest part was the house. I couldn't just pack up and leave without raising suspicions, but I needed to prepare for a quick exit. So I started small. A few books disappeared from my office. Some clothes went to charity, actually to a storage unit I'd rented across town. Tools, electronics, personal items that mattered to me but wouldn't be immediately missed. Elise noticed nothing. She was too busy with her new life, her exciting affair, her transformation from suburban housewife to whatever she thought she was becoming. The phone calls were what finally convinced me I was doing the right thing. I'd started paying attention to her patterns, and they were depressingly predictable. Every Tuesday and Thursday, she worked late. Every Saturday, she had errands that took hours longer than they should have. And every night, there were the text messages. Never when I was around, but always at specific times. 11:30, 1:15, 2 in the morning. I didn't try to read them. I didn't need to. The timing told me everything I needed to know. 3 days before I was scheduled to disappear, she made a mistake. I was in the garage, working on my boat, a 24-foot cabin cruiser that was my pride and joy and my escape from domestic stress. She was in the kitchen, probably thinking the garage door would muffle her conversation. It didn't. "I can't keep doing this," she was saying. Nick's starting to ask questions. Pause. "No, he doesn't know anything specific, but he's not stupid, and I'm tired of lying to him." Longer pause. "I know what we agreed, but this is harder than I thought it would be." Another pause, and then her voice dropped to almost a whisper. "I miss you too, but we have to be careful." I stopped working and listened, my hand still holding the wrench I'd been using to adjust the engine mounting. "Tomorrow night? I don't know if I can get away again so soon." Pause. "Okay, yes. I'll figure something out." The conversation ended, and I heard her footsteps heading upstairs. I stayed in the garage for another hour, not really working on anything, just thinking. She missed him. They had agreements. She was tired of lying to me, but not tired enough to stop. The next morning, she announced that she had to work late again. Very apologetic, very regretful, but Brett needed her to stay and finish some urgent research. "Of course," I said. "I understand." She kissed my cheek, grabbed her purse, and headed out to spend the evening with her lover. Just another day in the life of a cheating wife and her oblivious husband. Except I wasn't oblivious anymore. I was done. That night, while she was with Brett Paxton, I packed one bag. Not much, just clothes for a few days, some personal items, important documents. Everything else could wait. Everything else was just stuff. I left the bag in my car, hidden in the trunk where she wouldn't see it. Tomorrow morning, Elise Harper was going to wake up to a very different world than the one she'd been living in. And Brett Paxton, who meant nothing to her anymore, was going to discover that sometimes the consequences of our actions take a while to catch up with us. But they always do, eventually. I woke up at 4:30 in the morning, 2 hours before my usual alarm. Elise was sleeping beside me, turned away, her blonde hair spread across the pillow like spilled sunlight. She looked peaceful, innocent. If I hadn't known better, I might have felt guilty about what I was planning. But I did know better. She'd come home at midnight with another story about working late, smelling like expensive cologne that definitely wasn't mine. She'd brushed her teeth twice, which was one time more than usual, and had been careful not to let our bodies touch when she got into bed. Small details, but engineers live and die by small details. I slipped out of bed, moving carefully to avoid waking her. 20 years of marriage teaches you how your spouse sleeps, which floorboards creak, how to move through a shared space like a ghost. I gathered the clothes I'd laid out the night before and dressed in the bathroom with the door closed. In my home office, I did one final check of my preparations. The important documents were already in my car. My computer files were backed up to an encrypted drive that was going with me. The business accounts were secure, protected by the restructuring Bob and I had completed the week before. I left 3 things on my desk: a copy of our marriage certificate, a printed list of all our joint financial accounts with current balances, and a business card for Tim Morrison with a handwritten note on the back. He'll explain everything. No letter, no explanation. No justification or accusations or pleas for understanding. Just the facts and a phone number. At 5:15, I carried my bag out to the car. The neighborhood was quiet, most houses still dark. A few early commuters were starting their day, but no one who would remember seeing me leave. Perfect. I sat in the driver's seat for a moment, looking back at the house Elise and I had shared for 8 years. We'd been happy there, at least for a while. We'd painted the front door together, argued about landscaping, hosted dinner parties for friends who probably wouldn't take sides when this all came out. But that was before Brett Paxton and late-night text messages and lies that came as easily as breathing, before I realized that the woman I'd married had been replaced by someone I didn't recognize and couldn't trust. I started the car and drove away without looking back. The apartment Tim had helped me find was in Federal Hill, about 15 minutes from our house, but a world away in terms of atmosphere. Furnished efficiency, month-to-month lease, everything included. The kind of place that catered to people in transition, recent divorces, job relocations, life changes that required temporary solutions. It wasn't much, but it was mine. No shared history, no memories, no lies echoing off the walls. I unpacked my single bag, made coffee with a machine that had seen better days, and settled in to wait. At 7:30, my new phone rang. The number I'd kept was disconnected as of 6 a.m., replaced by a prepaid device that only 3 people knew about: Tim, Bob, and me. "It's done?" Tim asked. "It's done. How do you feel?" I considered the question. How did I feel? relieved mostly. Like I'd finally stopped holding my breath after months of suffocation. Free, I said. Good. Remember, no contact with her directly, no matter what. Everything goes through me. Understood. She's going to try to reach you. When that fails, she'll probably try to reach Bob, maybe some of your mutual friends. I've prepared them as much as I can, but be ready for some awkward conversations. I'd spent the previous week having those conversations. Careful, strategic discussions with the people who mattered. Bob, obviously. My sons Jimmy and Sid, both adults who deserved to know what was happening before they heard it through the rumor mill. A few close friends who might get caught in the crossfire. The message was consistent. I was fine, I was safe, I needed some space, and I'd be in touch when I was ready. Don't give Elise any information about where I was or how to reach me. Everything else would be explained in time. Most of them understood. The ones who didn't understand weren't really friends anyway. At 8:15, my old phone started ringing in the drawer where I'd left it, turned off but still connected to the charger. I'd turned it on just long enough to see 17 missed calls and 34 text messages, all from Elise. The messages started confused, then worried, then angry, then desperate. A complete emotional progression in digital form. Where are you? Nick, please call me. This isn't funny. I'm scared. Please come home. What's wrong? What did I do? We need to talk. I found your note. I don't understand. Please don't do this. And finally, at 7:45, I'm calling the police. I turned the phone back off and put it away. She could call whoever she wanted. I hadn't committed any crime except refusing to be lied to anymore. At 9 a.m., Bob texted my new number. She showed up at the office. Handled it like we discussed. You okay? I texted back, I'm fine. Thanks. At 9:30, Tim called. She hired a lawyer. Jennifer Walsh, good reputation, specializes in family law. This is going to get professional quickly. Good. Better than having her show up at my apartment with tears and promises. About that, she doesn't know where you're living, right? No one knows except you. Keep it that way. The cleaner this stays, the better for everyone. I spent the rest of the day setting up my new life. It wasn't much of a life yet, just an efficiency apartment and a job I could do from anywhere with an internet connection. But it was honest. No lies, no deception, no pretending everything was fine while my marriage rotted from the inside. That evening, I walked down to the harbor and found a bar that catered to people who worked with their hands. The kind of place where the beer was cold, the conversation was minimal, and nobody asked personal questions. I ordered a beer and a burger and tried to process what I'd done. 20 years of marriage ended with a single bag and a business card. No screaming fights, no dramatic confrontations, no attempts to work things out. Just a quiet exit in the early morning darkness. Most people would say I'd handled it wrong, that I should have confronted her, demanded the truth, given her a chance to explain or apologize or promise to do better, that marriages were worth fighting for, that love could overcome betrayal, that people deserved second chances. Maybe they were right. Maybe I was a coward for walking away instead of fighting, but I'd seen enough structural failures to know that some damage can't be repaired. When the foundation cracks, you don't just patch it and hope for the best. You tear it down and build something new, or you accept that the whole thing is going to collapse eventually. Elise had cracked our foundation, not just with the affair, but with the lies that made it possible. The easy deception, the practiced stories, the way she could look me in the eye and promise that Brett Paxton meant nothing while texting him at 2 a.m. I finished my beer and walked back to my apartment. It was small, impersonal, temporary, but it was built on solid ground. My phone rang as I was getting ready for bed. Tim again. Her lawyer called. She wants to meet, try to work things out. I told them no, that you're not interested in reconciliation. Good. Nick, I have to ask, are you sure about this? Because once we start the formal proceedings, it gets a lot harder to change your mind. I thought about Elise waking up alone that morning, about her confusion, her panic, her desperate attempts to reach me, about the tears she'd probably cried and the promises she'd probably made to empty rooms. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Then I remembered Brett Paxton's name glowing on her phone at 2 a.m, and the feeling passed. I'm sure, I said. File the papers. Okay. It'll take a few days to finalize everything, but once they're served, there's no going back. There's already no going back. After Tim hung up, I sat in my small apartment and listened to the sounds of the city outside my window. Traffic, sirens, people living their lives in all their messy complexity. Somewhere out there, Elise was probably crying or angry or both, trying to figure out how her carefully managed double life had collapsed so suddenly. She'd probably call Brett, looking for comfort or advice or just someone to blame. Maybe he'd be supportive. Maybe he'd realize that dating a married woman was one thing, but dealing with the aftermath of a divorce was something else entirely. Either way, it wasn't my problem anymore. I'd kept my promise to myself. I'd extracted myself from a failing marriage cleanly, completely, without drama or violence or public scenes. I'd protected my assets, my business, and my dignity. Now all I had to do was wait for Elise to realize that the life she'd been living, the careful balance between husband and lover, the elaborate deceptions, the thrill of forbidden romance, was over. She'd promised me that Brett Paxton meant nothing to her anymore. Tomorrow, she was going to find out if he felt the same way about her. Somehow, I doubted it. 3 days after I disappeared, Elise made her first mistake. Tim called me at 8 in the morning, and I could hear the amusement in his voice before he said a word. "Your wife hired a private investigator," he said. "To find me?" "To find you, investigate you. Probably build a case that you're hiding assets or having an affair or planning something illegal. The investigator called me yesterday, fishing for information." I was sitting in my efficiency apartment, drinking coffee and watching the harbor through my single window. The view wasn't much, but it was peaceful. No drama, no lies, no Brett Paxton texting at 2 in the morning. "What did you tell him?" "That my client is exercising his legal right to live separately from his spouse pending divorce proceedings, and that all communication should go through counsel. Very professional, very boring." "And?" "And he seemed frustrated. Apparently you've been very thorough about covering your tracks. No paper trail, no suspicious activity, no evidence of anything except a man who decided he was done with his marriage." I felt a small surge of satisfaction. 20 years of engineering discipline applied to personal problems, measure twice, cut once. "She's getting desperate," Tim continued. "Her lawyer says she's been calling constantly, wanting updates, demanding they find some way to force you to communicate with her." "Any legal basis for that?" "None. You're not hiding from the court, you're not concealing assets, you're not violating any laws, you're just gone. It's driving her crazy." I could picture it. Elise, who had always been able to manage situations through charm or tears or carefully applied pressure, suddenly facing a problem that couldn't be solved with her usual tools. A husband who had simply vanished, leaving behind only lawyers and legal documents and a silence that no amount of pleading could break. "There's something else," Tim said. "She's been asking about reconciliation. Her lawyer floated the idea of mediation, couples therapy, a trial separation instead of divorce." "No." "I told them that, but they are persistent. They want to know what it would take to get you to the table." "Nothing. There's nothing she could offer that would change my mind." "Not even an explanation? An apology?" I thought about that. About 20 years of marriage reduced to a moment of betrayal and months of lies. About the woman I'd loved and the stranger she'd become. "Especially not that," I said. "Explanations are just more lies with better packaging." Tim was quiet for a moment. "Okay, I'll make that clear to her counsel. But Nick, you should know. She's not going to give up easily. People like your wife don't accept defeat gracefully." "What do you mean?" "I mean she's going to escalate, try to force your hand somehow, make this public maybe, or go after the business, or find some other pressure point. Be ready." I hung up and finished my coffee, thinking about pressure points. In engineering, every structure has them, places where stress concentrates, where failure is most likely to occur. The trick is identifying them before your opponent does. Elise knew me well enough to know where my weak spots were. The business, my sons, my reputation in the community. She'd probably try all of them eventually, looking for something that would make me break my silence. But she'd made a fundamental miscalculation. She thought I was hiding, that I'd eventually get lonely or guilty or tired of living in exile. She thought this was a negotiating tactic, a way to force her to end the affair and come back to the marriage on my terms. She didn't understand that I was already gone, not physically, though that too, but emotionally, psychologically, completely. The man who had loved her, who would have fought for their marriage, who might have been willing to forgive and rebuild, had died the moment I saw Brett Paxton's name on her phone. What remained was just an engineer, solving a problem. 2 days later, she found her first pressure point. I was at Bob's office reviewing some contracts for a new project when my son Jimmy called. "Dad, Mom's here. She's upset." Jimmy was 22, a college senior, home for a long weekend. Good kid, smart, athletic, the kind of son any father would be proud of. He'd taken the news of the separation better than I'd expected, but then he'd always been perceptive. He'd probably seen the cracks in our marriage before I had. "Where's here?" I asked. "My apartment. She showed up about an hour ago, crying, asking if I knew where you were. I told her what you said, that you were safe and you'd be in touch when you were ready. But Dad, she's really falling apart. I felt a familiar tug of guilt and pushed it away. Elise was an adult who had made adult choices. The consequences were hers to deal with. Did she say what she wanted? She wants to talk to you. She keeps saying there's been a misunderstanding, that she can explain everything if you'll just give her a chance. And what did you tell her? That I don't know how to reach you, which is true. But Dad, maybe you should consider it. I mean, 20 years of marriage, there has to be something worth saving. Jimmy meant well. He was young, idealistic, still believed that love could conquer all and that every problem had a solution if people just tried hard enough. I'd been like that once. Son, some things can't be fixed. Sometimes the best thing you can do is walk away before more damage gets done. But what if she's telling the truth? What if it really is just a misunderstanding? I looked out the window of Bob's office, watching the ships move through the harbor. Massive vessels, built to withstand storms and stress and the corrosive power of salt water. But even they had limits. Push them too hard, ignore the warning signs, and they'd break apart and sink. It's not a misunderstanding, I said. And even if it was, the trust is gone. You can't rebuild a marriage on a foundation of lies. Jimmy was quiet for a moment. She asked me to give you a message. I'm listening. She said to tell you that Brett Paxton really doesn't mean anything to her, that whatever you think happened, you're wrong, and that she loves you. The words hit me like a physical blow, not because they moved me, but because they confirmed everything I'd suspected about Elise's character. Even now, even after being caught, she was still lying, still trying to manage the situation, control the narrative, make me the villain for not believing her carefully crafted denials. Dad, you still there? I'm here. Jimmy, I need you to listen to me carefully. Your mother is going to keep trying to use you and your brother to get to me. Don't let her. This is between her and me, and it needs to stay that way. But no buts. I know you love her, and I know you want to help. But the best thing you can do for everyone is stay out of it. Can you do that for me? Yeah, I guess. But Dad, what if she's right? What if you're making a mistake? Then I'll live with the consequences. But I don't think I am. After I hung up, Bob looked at me with the kind of expression that comes from 30 years of friendship. Rough call? She's using the kids now, trying to guilt me into contact. Classic move. My ex-brother-in-law tried the same thing when his wife caught him cheating. Suddenly everything was a misunderstanding, and she was being unreasonable for not forgiving him. How'd that work out? She took half his assets and moved to Florida. Last I heard, he was living in a studio apartment and driving a 10-year-old Honda. I smiled for the first time in days. There's hope for justice, after all. That evening, I was reading in my apartment when someone knocked on my door. 3 sharp raps, confident and demanding. I looked through the peephole and saw a woman I didn't recognize, mid-30s, professional clothes, the kind of aggressive posture that screamed lawyer or process server. I didn't open the door. Mr. Harper, I know you're in there. I'm Jennifer Walsh, your wife's attorney. We need to talk. I stayed silent. Legally, I had no obligation to speak with opposing counsel, especially not in an unscheduled ambush at my home. Mr. Harper, your wife is very concerned about you. She just wants to know that you're safe and well. Surely you can understand that. Still nothing from me. Look, I know you're angry. I know you feel betrayed, but running away isn't going to solve anything. Elise is willing to do whatever it takes to save your marriage, counseling, therapy, whatever you need. But you have to give her a chance. I almost laughed. Even through her lawyer, Elise was still trying to control the narrative. I was the one running away, the one being unreasonable, the one who needed to give her a chance. The affair was just a misunderstanding. The lies were just miscommunication. The betrayal was just a failure to properly explain her innocent behavior. Mr. Harper, if you don't respond, I'll have to assume you're in some kind of distress. I may have to contact the authorities for a wellness check. That was a bluff, and we both knew it, but it told me something important. Elise was getting desperate. The private investigator had failed to find any leverage, the kids had refused to betray my location, and her attempts to force contact through legal channels had been blocked by Tim's professional competence. She was running out of options. I waited until I heard footsteps retreating down the hallway, then called Tim. Elise's lawyer just showed up at my door, I said. Jennifer Walsh? What did she want? To guilt me into contact. When that didn't work, she threatened to call the police for a wellness check. Tim snorted. Empty threat. You're not missing, you're not in danger, and you're not violating any court orders. She's fishing. For what? Anything. Some sign that you're not as resolved as you appear. some evidence that this is just a negotiating tactic instead of a genuine decision to end the marriage, some way to get you back to the table so Elise can work her magic. And when she realizes that's not going to happen, then things get interesting, because right now she's still operating under the assumption that this is fixable. When that assumption breaks down, she'll either accept reality and negotiate a reasonable settlement, or she'll go nuclear and try to destroy you out of spite. Which do you think she'll choose? Tim was quiet for a moment. Based on what I've seen so far, nuclear. Your wife strikes me as someone who's used to getting what she wants, and she wants you back. When she finally accepts that's not going to happen, she's going to be very, very angry. Let her be angry. Anger makes people make mistakes. True, but it also makes them dangerous. Watch your back, Nick. This isn't over yet. After Tim hung up, I sat in my small apartment and thought about danger. About the woman I'd been married to for 20 years, who I'd thought I knew completely, who had turned out to be capable of months of systematic deception. What else was she capable of when backed into a corner? I was about to find out. Elise went nuclear on a Tuesday morning in October, 3 weeks after her lawyer's failed ambush at my apartment. I was having breakfast at a diner near the harbor when Bob called, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. "They hit the business?" he said. I felt ice water in my veins. "What do you mean, hit?" Health Department inspection, OSHA compliance review, IRS audit notification, all on the same day, all unscheduled, all citing anonymous complaints about safety violations and tax irregularities. I closed my eyes. Clever. Vicious, but clever. Elise couldn't get to me directly, so she was going after the thing that mattered most to me after my sons. The company Bob and I had built from nothing. How bad? Bad. They're treating it like a major investigation, seized records, interviewed employees, the whole show. We're shut down until further notice. Any actual violations? You know better than that. We run a clean operation. But that doesn't matter if they want to find problems. There's always something, a form filed late, a safety protocol that could be interpreted differently, an expense that might look questionable to the right investigator. I paid for my breakfast and walked outside, needing air and space to think. The harbor was busy with its usual morning traffic, ships and boats moving with purposeful efficiency. Everything in its place, everything functioning as designed, unlike my life. "Bob, I'm sorry. This is my fault. Don't apologize. Just fix it." "How?" "Give her what she wants. Talk to her. End this thing before she destroys everything we've built." I understood his position. Bob had a family, employees who depended on him, a business that represented 30 years of his life. He couldn't afford to let my personal problems destroy his professional world, but I also understood what giving in would mean. It would tell Elise that she'd found my pressure point, that she could manipulate me through threats to the people and things I cared about. It would reward her nuclear strategy and guarantee that she'd use it again whenever she didn't get her way. "I can't do that," I said. "Nick, I can't. The moment I give in to this kind of blackmail, I'm trapped forever. She'll own me." Bob was quiet for a long moment. "Then we need another solution. I'm working on it." I called Tim from my car, driving aimlessly through Baltimore while I tried to process what was happening. "She's escalating," he said when I explained the situation. "This is what I was afraid of." "Can we prove she's behind it?" "Probably not directly. Anonymous complaints are anonymous for a reason, but the timing is suspicious, and the coordination suggests someone with knowledge of how to work the system. Elise would know. She works for a litigation firm, deals with regulatory agencies all the time. Exactly. She knows which buttons to push and how to push them without leaving fingerprints. So what do we do? Legally, not much. The investigations are legitimate now, regardless of how they started. Your business will have to deal with them through proper channels. And personally? That depends. How far are you willing to go to end this? I thought about that question for the rest of the day. How far was I willing to go? I'd already sacrificed my marriage, my home, my comfortable life. Now Elise was threatening my livelihood, my business partner, the employees who counted on us for their paychecks. The old Nick, the one who had loved and trusted her, would have folded, would have called her, agreed to meet, tried to find some middle ground that would make the investigations go away. But the old Nick was gone. What remained was an engineer with a problem to solve, and engineers don't give up just because the problem is difficult. That evening, I did something I'd avoided for 3 weeks. I turned on my old phone and read Elise's messages. There were hundreds of them now, a complete record of her emotional journey from confusion to anger to desperation to rage. The early ones were pleading, apologetic, full of promises to explain everything if I just give her a chance. The recent ones were different. "You're destroying everything we built together." This is insane. You're being insane. I never cheated on you. Whatever you think you know, you're wrong. You can't just disappear and pretend 20 years didn't happen. I'm trying to save our marriage, and you're acting like a child. And finally, from yesterday, if you won't talk to me, I'll find other ways to get your attention. There it was, a confession, in writing, that she was behind the attacks on my business. Not explicit enough to hold up in court, but clear enough to confirm what I already knew. I scrolled back through the messages, looking for patterns, clues, anything that might give me an advantage. What I found was even better than I'd hoped. Elise had always been emotional, prone to saying more than she should when she was upset, and she'd been very upset for 3 weeks, sending message after message to a phone she thought I was reading. Mixed in with the pleas and threats and denials were details, specific references to conversations with Brett, mentions of places they'd met, times and dates that painted a clear picture of an affair that had been going on for months, not the innocent friendship she'd claimed. But the real treasure was in the most recent messages, the ones sent after she'd gone nuclear on my business. In her anger, she'd revealed things she probably didn't mean to reveal, references to Jennifer's plan and making him understand and showing him what he's throwing away. Jennifer was her lawyer, Jennifer Walsh, which meant that Walsh was either incompetent enough to let her client confess to harassment via text message or unethical enough to participate in it. Either way, it was leverage. I forwarded the relevant messages to Tim with a simple note. Ammunition. He called me 20 minutes later. This is good, he said. Very good. She's basically confessed to orchestrating the investigations, and she's implicated her attorney in the process. Good enough to make it stop? Good enough to make them think twice about continuing. I'll have a conversation with Ms. Walsh tomorrow, share some concerns about her client's recent communications. Sometimes a gentle reminder about professional ethics is all it takes. And if it's not? Then we go public. File a harassment complaint, share these messages with the relevant authorities, make it clear that your wife's attempts to manipulate the legal system aren't going unnoticed. I felt something I hadn't experienced in weeks. Hope. Not for reconciliation, that was still impossible, but for an end to the escalation, a return to the clean, professional divorce I'd originally planned. There's something else, Tim continued. I've been thinking about your wife's strategy, and I think she's made a fundamental error. What kind of error? She's assuming you still care about her opinion, her approval, her emotional state. All of this, the messages, the lawyer visits, the attacks on your business, it's designed to force you back into a relationship with her, even if it's just to fight. And you don't care anymore. You've genuinely moved on, emotionally and psychologically. She's fighting a war against an enemy who's already left the battlefield. He was right. I'd spent 3 weeks worried about Elise's next move, her emotional state, her attempts to force contact. But I hadn't spent any time missing her, wanting her back, or regretting my decision to leave. The woman I'd loved was gone, replaced by someone who could orchestrate anonymous complaints against my business and call it love. Someone who could lie for months and then act betrayed when the lies were discovered. Someone who could turn my sons into messengers and my livelihood into a weapon. I didn't want that person back in my life, no matter what she threatened or promised or destroyed. So what's our next move? I asked. We wait. Let her make the next mistake. Because she will. People like your wife can't help themselves. They always push too far. And if she doesn't make a mistake, then we make our own move. But let's give her a chance to hang herself first. It's more satisfying that way. That night, I sat in my efficiency apartment and thought about satisfaction, about justice and revenge and the difference between the two, about the woman who had shared my bed for 20 years and the stranger who was trying to destroy my life. Somewhere across the city, Elise was probably planning her next attack, convinced that she could force me back to the negotiating table through sheer persistence and escalating pressure. So she was wrong. But I was curious to see how far she'd go before she figured that out. The answer, as it turned out, was farther than I'd imagined. The end came not with drama, but with paperwork. Tim called me on a Friday morning 6 weeks after the business attacks began, his voice carrying the satisfied tone of a lawyer who'd just won a difficult case. It's over, he said. She's agreed to our terms. I was in my new office. Bob and I had relocated after the investigations cleared us, but left our reputation damaged, reviewing contracts for a small marina project. Nothing glamorous, but honest work that paid the bills. All of them. All of them. Clean divorce, equitable asset split, no alimony, no claims on the business. She keeps the house, you keep your boat, and your freedom. Jennifer Walsh has been very cooperative since our conversation about professional ethics. I leaned back in my chair, processing the information. After months of warfare, threats, and escalation, it was ending with signatures on legal documents. Anticlimactic, but satisfying in its own way. What changed her mind? Reality. The investigations didn't find anything because there was nothing to find. Her harassment campaign backfired when I filed complaints with the state bar about her attorney's conduct, and I think she finally realized that you weren't coming back, no matter what she threatened or destroyed. And Brett Paxton? Tim chuckled. Ah, yes, Mr. Paxton. Apparently he was less supportive of her campaign than she'd hoped, something about not wanting to be associated with someone who was acting crazy about her ex-husband. He ended things 2 weeks ago. I felt a moment of something that might have been pity. Elise had destroyed her marriage for a man who'd abandoned her the moment the situation became inconvenient. She'd escalated a clean divorce into a vicious battle and ended up with nothing to show for it except legal bills and a reputation for vindictive behavior. So she has neither of us, I said. Exactly what she deserves, according to your original assessment. After Tim hung up, I sat in my small office and contemplated the end of my marriage. 20 years, reduced to a legal settlement and a few boxes of personal belongings. It should have felt more significant, more final. Instead, it felt like completing a difficult engineering project. Problem identified, solution designed, implementation executed, results achieved. Clean, professional, satisfactory. Bob knocked on my door and stuck his head in. Good news? The best. It's over. Congratulations. I think. He paused. Any regrets? I considered the question seriously. Regrets about the marriage ending, about the woman Elise had become, about the months of conflict that could have been avoided if she'd been honest from the beginning. No, I said. No regrets. Good. Because there's something you should know. What? I saw her yesterday, at the grocery store. She looked... He searched for the right word. Lost, like she couldn't figure out how she'd ended up where she was. I nodded. It made sense. Elise had spent months fighting for something she'd already thrown away, convinced that she could manipulate her way back to a life that no longer existed. The realization that her actions had consequences, that some damage couldn't be undone with tears and promises, would be difficult for someone who'd always been able to charm her way out of trouble. She made her choices, I said. Now she gets to live with them. Cold. Realistic. That evening, I walked down to the harbor and sat on a bench overlooking the water. Ships moved through the channel with their lights cutting through the darkness, each one following its own course to its own destination. My phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number, but I recognized the tone immediately. I hope you're happy. You got what you wanted. Elise, using a new phone or a friend's number, making one last attempt at contact. One final try at making me feel guilty for refusing to be manipulated. I deleted the message without responding and blocked the number. She was wrong, of course. I hadn't gotten what I wanted. What I'd wanted was a wife who could be trusted, a marriage built on honesty, a partner who valued our relationship more than the thrill of deception. What I'd gotten instead was freedom from someone who'd proven herself incapable of those things. It wasn't what I'd wanted, but it was what I needed. The next morning, I started looking at apartments with better views and longer leases. It was time to stop living in transition and start building something permanent, something honest, something that couldn't be destroyed by lies or threats or the vindictive actions of people who confused love with possession. Somewhere across the city, Elise was probably doing the same thing, trying to figure out how to rebuild a life that had imploded under the weight of her own choices. I hoped she'd learned something from the experience, though I doubted it. People like her rarely did. But that wasn't my problem anymore. I'd kept my promise to myself. I'd extracted myself from a failing marriage cleanly, completely, without compromising my principles or my dignity. I'd protected what mattered to me and let go of what didn't. She'd promised me that Brett Paxton no longer mattered to her. In the end, she was right. He meant nothing, she meant nothing, and so did the carefully maintained illusion of a marriage that had been falling apart long before I finally ended it. Now we both had exactly what our choices had earned us. It was, I thought, a kind of justice after all.